So in this segment, we're going to be talking about court delays, and it's important to make the point that before the pandemic, there were massive delays with court hearings and things like that, and that's something we'll talk about in the kind of second half of the segment. And if you want to know more about court delays and stuff, I recommend you follow the Secret Barrister on Twitter. He's or I assume it's a guy. It could be a lady. Who knows? I assume they are they are they cover this stuff on occasion as well when it's relevant for them. So we're going to be talking about this story here, and we're going to be going into something else, talking about pre-COVID. The backlog in the Crown Courts has hit a record of 56,000 cases, meaning some cases are now being timetabled for 2023. The Lord Chancellor, Robert Buckland, the Cabinet Minister in charge of the courts, is promising that a recovery plan will bring justice, but will those plans make a difference to victims waiting for their voices to be heard? And you've got to think that, if you were wronged, say, this year or last year, and you have to wait, 3 years in order to have your case, 3 years to have your day in court, that must be incredibly painful to have, such delays, especially if you've been wronged in, the worst ways possible. So it's tough. It's tough to talk about. I can't imagine what it's like to go through. So if you want to know what it feels like to wait for justice for a serious crime, consider the limbo that Jenny finds herself in. This is the person's story they're talking about. For legal reasons, the BBC is not revealing any details of the case, but put briefly, she quietly and secretly coped for years with having been the victim of serious sexual violence. When the Me Too movement took hold, she decided that she too had to speak out, and credit to her for that. In 2018, detectives video recorded Jenny's allegations, and after a long and complex investigation, the CPS concluded last summer that her abuser should be charged with serious offences. So this was in 2018. Jenny agreed not to begin deep trauma therapy because it may affect her evidence in court. Last autumn, she learned that her abuser would face trial, and she was devastated. So this is, the person most likely pleading not guilty. So she learned when her last autumn she learned when her abuser would face trial, and she was devastated, obviously because of the length of time. Sorry, I just brain melted there. Weeping, she recalled her conversation with the police officer. The first court hearing and second court hearing were really close to each other, and so that gave me some faith. I thought, it's taken this long to get to this point, but actually maybe the next bit isn't going to be as long. I was asked to provide dates of availability for court for the next 9 months, so I thought it's just another 9 months, I can do this. And then when I got the call, they gave me the date. It was in 2022. So you've got to imagine, she's dealt with this pain. We don't know how long. But what we do know, in 2018, the CPS said this is going to court, that this person should be prosecuted, okay? It's going to take 4 years for her day in court. It's going to take 4 years for, her to actually get some justice. I was asked, I said down the phone, do you mean 2021? And they said, no, we mean 2022. And I got really angry. How can anyone believe that this is acceptable? That you keep somebody in trauma and you don't give them access to the therapy that they need? Every week has been a roller coaster, to the point that Jenny cannot currently work, and her family are rallying around to support her as she tries to comprehend the absence of justice. She's going to have to wait a long time to have her day in court. And we don't even know. That could be delayed further. We don't know. Every week since has since been a roller coaster, to the point. Oh, sorry, I've mentioned that bit. I started to have a panic attack in the middle of town. I can't breathe. My body goes tight. I start convulsing. I'm sometimes sick. I'm shaking. I'm wailing, trying to understand why is that happening. There have been 2 occasions where I felt suicidal. The second time, when I was told the trial would be in 2022, I felt like I'd been let down by the state, and in fairness, she has been let down by the state. This was the whole system letting me down. Jenny's experience sounds extreme, but this is not exceptional because of the enormous delays in criminal court. So what does this story tell us? That there are people who are the victims of some of the worst crimes who had to wait years. So we saw, in 2018, all right? Where's it gone? In 2018, detectives video recorded Jenny's allegations. After a long and complex investigation, the Crown prosecution concluded last summer that her abuser should be charged with a serious offence, okay? And so she was asked, where is it gone? I was asked to provide dates of availability for court for the next 9 months, so I thought it's just another 9 months. I can do this. Then I got the call. It was 2022. I said down the phone, you do mean 2021? And they said no, we mean next year. So she's had to wait an incredibly long time. Really since obviously the incident happened or whatever happened specifically. But on top of this, she had to wait since 2018. It's taken her 4 years to get her day in court. That's a long time. So we keep going. Record backlog. Last month, the Watchdog that report on the police prosecution and prisons and probation all agreed that the backlog in Crown Courts of 54,000 cases was of grave concern. Well, no duh. In the last week, it's hit an all-time record of 56,000 court cases, and this is what over since March, since the pandemic. So you can see it's 40,000. It's gone up quite a bit to above 50,000 in December, but it started off very high. It's gone up by about 10,000, but you can see how high it was already pre-pandemic, and that's the main point here. These were issues that were long before the pandemic. And that's something we'll talk about. There was a backlog in the Crown Courts before the pandemic hit. Coronavirus made operations far harder because many courtrooms are too small to safely distance everyone who needs to be inside. Speaking to the BBC, Mr. Buckland has defended the government's attempts to tackle these record backlogs. He has promised that his court recovery plan will work, but it will take time. I mean, how much time you got, bro? How much time have you got? Today, he's announcing 14 more temporary Nightingale courts, converted spaces and hotel conference facilities that are part of £113 million of spending to alleviate the pressure. Part of Manchester Crown Court will be knocked through to create a new super court, four large socially distanced gang trials, about 20,000 monthly remote video hearings, not without some technical problems, are already part of the court process. We've seen people have all sorts of problems with, Zoom and stuff like that, with a guy being turned into a cat. He put a cat filter on, which was funny, but, it could happen. And obviously, if you don't have access to the internet, or if you have poor internet connection, or if you don't have clear microphones, it'd be very difficult to communicate, especially when there's a delay on apps like Zoom and Discord. I think we're virtually at the limit of what we think is feasible. We continue to look at what can be done, but I think the key now is it's not just about the capacity, it's about getting cases listed, working with judges, and I think we can make that solid progress this year. I mean, good luck, Buckland, mate, but given the your party's record, I do not have a lot of faith. This is, these sketches are always nice. The Criminal Bar Association say new spaces are not enough, they need to be staffed, which obviously makes sense. We've seen, the Nightingale hospitals, being open and being understaffed. Why? Because the government didn't have enough nurses or doctors and medical professionals to staff them. This is not rocket science. You can turn this whole country into Nightingale courts, but because you don't have enough judges, it's not going to make a bit of difference. In 2009-2010, the budget for Crown Courts in England and Wales meant judges could sit for more than 108,000 days. Last year it was 86,000. That roughly equates to only 45% of available court space being used before the pandemic hit. So you can see sometimes it's very hard to break down some of the specifics because, again, I'm not very bright. But what you can see here is that since 2010, that's when the Conservative government, the Conservative Party took over the country. Obviously, they're in coalition, but, we're not going to be splitting hairs. Is that, court dates for judges were massively, maybe not cut down intentionally, but seem to be cut down. So that equates to only 5% of available court space being used. So they're not even using half the court space available before the pandemic. So you can see why the Conservative government, the party of law and order, was racking up court cases, for the country. Why? Because they didn't have, enough judges or to actually, use the available court space. Mr. Buckland says reductions in sitting days were driven by projections of falling crime. I mean, why did you suddenly think crime was going to fall? Is it because your party was in charge? Is it because you cut the amount of police officers? So then evidently there would be, less criminals prosecuted, therefore less crime. Is that what you thought would happen? His critics say it was a political decision to deliver cuts. There's your answer there. And the BBC making this 50-50, is it because the Conservative government thought crime was going to fall, or is it because of cuts? Which one is it? I think it's obvious it's the cuts. He is now promising huge increases in sitting days above 100,000 in effect to return where the courts were. And this is kind of the joke of the Conservative Party, where what they'll do is they'll cut the numbers and then they won't return them, or they'll try to return them somewhere near to where they were, and they'll be like, look, we've increased court dates by 10,000. Is that great? But they're 5,000 lower than what they were in 2010. It's like, well, stop hating on us. Get behind the government and the prime minister, and we'll make magic happen. That's the Conservative Party philosophy. It's just embarrassing, and people fall for the spin because you need to look at net numbers. That's the key. As Mo from AFTV said, let's talk about net spend. Let's talk about here net days of court. Judges sitting down for court hearings. That sounded painful. I'm working out the number of days to be agreed with the Lord's Chief Justice, he says, but I can assure everybody that the number of sitting days will be significantly in advance of 82,000. Are they going to be at the 108,000? Are they going to be that number? Because if not, then shut up. Shut up, because you're not going to do as good a job as it was before 2010, and not to mention you have a giant backlog to work through. It's worth noting that before he became Prime Minister, Mr. Buckland sat as as a part-time Crown Court judge. So what he does, he says to victims like Jenny who are in limbo. So what does he say to victims like Jenny who are in limbo? The case is a dramatic example of a number of cases that concern me. I don't want to see victims and witnesses having to wait an inordinate length of time. I can understand her perspective. So, are you going to criticise your party for making all the cuts? Did you criticise your party for making the cuts? Because if not, shut up. I accept what you say about the huge frustrations and the anxiety and the concern that is out there, but I'm doing everything I can to mitigate those problems. So are you directly calling out your Prime Minister for making your Prime Minister for not doing enough for these courts? Are you going to call out the predecessors for making these cuts? Because if not, shut up. One of the most significant changes has been the extension of the option of pre-trial video recorded testimony and cross-examination for vulnerable victims and witnesses, in essence allowing them to give evidence long before a court hears the case. The government has also pledged an extra £40 million to support vulnerable people waiting for trial. If you divide that out by how many vulnerable people there are, how much is this number going to be? Come on, BBC, do better. Honestly, including 16 million more for independent sexual violence advisors, specialists who have been instrumental in supporting Jenny as she waits for justice. A good thing, but how much is that physically going to pay for, and how many do we actually need? These are the questions the BBC need to answer. Jenny, meanwhile, has been given permission by prosecutors to get additional help, but she can't get the specific deep counselling that could help her because the waiting list in her part of the country is staggeringly long. Another issue that the Conservative Party have made cuts to, things like mental health facilities, and haven't funded properly. They've made cuts to, and then they promised that we're gonna boost things like mental health spending, that are gonna help these people, but they don't do it. They never do. That's the trick. You keep telling people you're gonna do it, and then you never do it. Genius. I'm resilient, I've got support. What about individuals who have got no family, no friends, she says? How many of those have walked away, not because a crime didn't happen, but because the system hasn't enabled their voice to be heard, and you've got to come out, and you've got to imagine if some of these people get away with certain crimes because the victims can't make it to the court date for whatever reason, due to ailing mental health, etc. How many of these criminals are going to get away, and how many of them are going to continue to commit crimes? Those are the questions that the BBC or Robert Buckland need to answer. The system is not broken because of COVID. It was well broken before that, and you might put your Nightingale courts up. You might put your Nightingale courts up and running, but you need to go back to asking, what do the victims need? Absolutely, 100% agree with Jenny here, the person whose kind of story we've talked about. 100% agree. And if we actually look at, this was written pre-pandemic. This was January 2020, a long time ago, I know. But, we've mentioned that in the BBC article as well, but I think it's important to jump in the time machine that the internet has. Courtrooms are lying empty and judges are being prevented from presiding over trials while the backlog of criminal cases grows longer due to government cuts, according to a report by barristers in the west of England. A number of sitting days on the Western Circuit, which includes Winchester, Southampton, Exeter and Bristol, have been cut by 15% by HM Courts and Tribunal Service in the past year, causing rocketing delays, a study finds. And we've talked about these sort of delays and things like that he says here, look, the national average time between an offence and completion of the case in the Crown Court has risen over the past decade from 392 days, which is what, just over a year, about a year and a bit, to 200 in 2010 to 525 days. That's about what, a year and a half days in 2019. So this is pre-pandemic, guys. That's the point I'm trying to stress here, and because these numbers have gone way up. One unnamed resident judge quoted in the report said restrictions were causing considerable concern. These aren't COVID restrictions to witnesses and advocates when they have when they have attended anticipating the trial only to find it has been adjourned. That was particularly galling, the judge added. If one of the judges is reading papers, preparing, etc., so as to ensure we do not exceed the limited number of sitting days, we have the court and judge available, but not the sitting days within which to do the work. So what this judge here is saying, look, we have the time to read the papers and to prepare, but because of the amount of sitting days they have, which is days they can, I'm assuming, sit in court and actually hear cases, because those days have been cut, they can't actually do their job. That's it. It's like, telling a detective, you can do everything apart from arrest the person. There's only certain few days where you can arrest people. That's the equivalent I can come up with here. Reading days are being imposed on judges to keep sitting days down. The report said, although the judge is paid on an annual salary, money is still being saved by not paying court staff, advocates' fees, etc. Official figures for judges' reading days are not available, but it's understood that they have increased as court days have decreased. So what you can tell here is the government aren't even saving money on judges here. All they're doing is saving money on the other things associated with the court. Other staff that work there, the ushers and people like that. And you can see how the party of so-called law and order have created a huge problem here pre-COVID, and as I've said in previous videos, that this pandemic has only helped to exacerbate a lot of the problems we already had in this country with regards to things like education, with regards to health, with regards to policing, with regards to courts. These things have all been exacerbated by this pandemic and highlighted how, broken this country is. That's what's happened here. And that's the thing people need to realise. This court backlog didn't happen just because of COVID. This backlog's been building for about 10 years now. For about 10, 11 years. It's been building. Why? Because the Conservative Party made cuts to, judges. They made cuts to courts, more specifically. And what that has done is made people's court dates take longer. And so, especially in the case of people like Jenny, her court date has taken longer, not just because of COVID, but also because of the cuts made by the government. The party of law and order have destroyed law and order. It's crazy. They cut police and they've cut court dates. How can you claim to be the party of law and order when you have made these problems so bad to the point where this person here is not able to get the support they need to deal with the trauma that they have suffered because she doesn't want to damage her testimony in court. So she has to wait for her court date to be over in order to get the help she needs to get through the trauma she has suffered. And when is that court date going to happen? Next year. We don't know if the trial is going to be finished next year, but say it is. She's going to have to wait, we're in 2021 now, February, right? She's going to have to wait potentially till, say, next year, November, to get any sort of counselling. On top of that, she might still be on a wait list. For getting help to see a counsellor because of the Conservatives' lack of ability to fund mental health. It's just I can't imagine what it's like to go through this for the victims that in this country that have their court cases delayed for long periods of time because the government decided it was a good idea to cut judge sitting days. But anyways, I've rambled on long enough. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.